He posted, "Sometimes the trash takes itself out." I replied, "Real talk." Then I blocked him everywhere. 3 months later, the coworker he accused me of cheating with testified against his lies. My name is Natalie Carter. I'm 29 years old, and if you'd asked me a year ago how my relationship would end, I never would have guessed it would start with an Instagram notification at 10:43 on a Saturday night. I remember the time because I'd just climbed into bed after one of the most draining arguments of my life. The apartment was unusually quiet, not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in after hours of tension, when two people have run out of things to say, but neither of them feels any better. My phone lit up with a new Instagram post from Ethan Walker. 3 hours earlier, Ethan had been my boyfriend. By the time I opened the notification, that chapter of my life was already over. I opened the notification. The photo showed him standing at a rooftop bar downtown, drink in hand, surrounded by friends. He looked relaxed, confident, almost triumphant. If a stranger saw the picture, they'd assume he was celebrating something. Then I read the caption, "Sometimes the trash takes itself out." There was a trash can emoji, a sparkle emoji, and a few hashtags about new beginnings and better things ahead. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. The breakup itself didn't shock me. By that point, the relationship had been limping forward for months. What stung was how quickly he'd decided to rewrite the story. Within 3 hours, he'd already cast himself as the survivor and me as the problem. I actually laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind that slips out when something is so absurd you don't know what else to do. Because anyone looking at that post would have assumed Ethan had finally escaped some nightmare relationship. The reality was that I'd ended things after spending 7 straight months defending myself against accusations that existed only in his imagination. Most of those accusations centered around one person, Ryan Mitchell, my coworker. Ryan was 26, worked in my department, and happened to be the unlucky target of Ethan's obsession. There was nothing remotely inappropriate between us. We worked together, exchanged project updates, occasionally complained about deadlines, and went home. To me, those interactions were completely ordinary. Ethan saw something entirely different. Every conversation eventually circled back to Ryan. Every disagreement somehow became proof. Every notification on my phone turned into evidence. By the night we broke up, I was exhausted in a way that's difficult to explain unless you've lived through it. Not exhausted from fighting. Exhausted from repeating the same truth over and over while watching someone refuse to believe it. The final argument started when I stepped out of the shower and found Ethan sitting on the edge of my bed holding my phone. He wasn't even pretending anymore. My phone was unlocked. His face was tight with anger. Who is Ryan really? For a second I thought I'd misheard him. What? He shoved the screen toward me. The screen showed a completely ordinary work conversation. Ryan asking for quarterly figures, me sending a spreadsheet, followed by messages about deadlines, budgets, and project updates. The most boring exchange imaginable. Yet Ethan looked as though he'd uncovered a secret affair. You were texting him at 9 o'clock. We were finishing a project. You always have an excuse. I took a slow breath. It's not an excuse. It's literally what happened. That only made him angrier. According to Ethan, I talked about Ryan too much. I defended Ryan too quickly. I respected Ryan's opinion too much. Eventually, the accusations stopped feeling personal and started sounding like the same conversation repeated over and over. Finally, I asked the question I'd been avoiding for months. What exactly do you want me to do? Quit. I blinked. Quit my job? Or stop talking to him. He works in my department. I don't care. That answer told me everything. There wasn't a solution because Ethan wasn't looking for one. If I'd quit, there would have been someone else. Another coworker, another friend, another reason not to trust me. I remember looking at him and feeling something inside me settle. As I looked at him, the frustration and hurt that had followed me for months had suddenly gave way to something much simpler, clarity. For months, I'd kept hoping things would improve if I explained myself better, reassured him more, argued less, compromised harder. Standing there in a towel with wet hair dripping onto the carpet, I suddenly saw exactly where that road ended. For the first time, I could clearly see the future of our relationship. Nothing would change. We'd be having this exact argument again next week, next month, and probably years from now. Nothing would change because nothing ever had. Ethan. What? I can't do this anymore. He frowned. What are you talking about? I'm done. The words surprised him. I could see it happen in real time. He'd expected another argument, another round, another opportunity to wear me down. Instead, I was ending the conversation. You don't mean that. I do. No, you don't. His confidence would have been funny under different circumstances. I shook my head. I've never been more serious. The look on his face shifted from irritation to disbelief. You'll regret this. Maybe he believed that. Maybe he'd convinced himself I needed him more than he needed me. The strange thing was that I felt calmer with every passing minute. When he told me I'd never find someone willing to put up with my issues, I almost smiled at the irony. I was paying the rent, covering most of the bills, and spending my days defending myself against accusations that existed only in his imagination, yet somehow I was supposedly the problem. Apparently I was the issue. I opened the bedroom door. I think you should pack your things. His expression darkened. You can't kick me out. Your name isn't on the lease. I live here. No, I said quietly. You stay here. There's a difference. The distinction hit harder than I'd intended. For 8 months, Ethan had been living in my apartment without contributing much of anything. He paid occasionally when it suited him, promised more than he delivered, and somehow still acted like he was doing me a favor. A few minutes later, he grabbed his jacket, wallet, and keys. Before leaving, he stopped in the doorway. You'll regret this. I shrugged. Good night, Ethan. The door slammed behind him. And just like that, 2 years ended. I expected to cry after he left. Instead, I found myself sitting on the couch feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. It was the kind of relief that arrives quietly after you've carried a burden for so long that you've forgotten what life feels like without it. 3 hours later, he posted the photo. 3 hours later, hundreds of strangers were congratulating him for escaping me. I scrolled through the comments. You're better off. His loss. Proud of you. People were cheering for a version of events that existed only inside Ethan's head. I considered defending myself. For about 10 seconds. Then I typed 2 words. Real talk. I left the comment. Blocked him on Instagram. Blocked him on Facebook. Blocked him on TikTok. Blocked him everywhere else I could think of. By midnight, his access to my life had been reduced to memories and a comment section. After that, I walked around the apartment collecting his things. Shoes by the door. Jackets in the closet. A gaming headset he'd left in the living room. Random clothes scattered through drawers. I stuffed everything into garbage bags. Not out of spite. Because I wanted the apartment back. I wanted it to feel like mine again. What I didn't know that night was that the breakup itself would end up being the easiest part of the entire story. At the time, I thought the hard part was over. I thought Ethan would grab his belongings, complain to his friends, and eventually move on. I was wrong. The next morning proved that faster than I could have imagined. At 7:13 a.m., someone started pounding on my front door. And deep down, before I even looked through the peephole, I already knew exactly who it was. I looked through the peephole and immediately regretted it. Ethan was standing in the hallway wearing the same clothes he'd left in the night before. His hair was messy, his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like someone who hadn't slept at all. The image would have been easier to sympathize with if he hadn't spent the previous evening telling the internet that breaking up with me was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He knocked again. Natalie, I know you're in there. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. Of course he was. 3 hours after celebrating his freedom online, he was standing outside my apartment trying to get back in. I wasn't interested in another argument, so I texted him instead. Your things are in bags by the door. Pick them up and leave. The response arrived almost instantly. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. A minute later, another message appeared. We're ending 2 years over one fight? That sentence irritated me more than anything he'd posted online. Calling it one fight felt ridiculous. He spoke as if the breakup had come out of nowhere, as though the previous 7 months had never happened. As if every accusation, every phone search, every demand for reassurance had magically disappeared. I typed back. It's not one fight, it's every fight. After that, I stopped responding. For a couple of days, things actually seemed calm. Ethan sent a few messages asking to talk, then a few more asking for another chance. I didn't respond. Looking back, that brief silence probably fooled me into thinking the worst was behind me. The messages became more emotional before they became hostile. At first, Ethan wanted another conversation. Then he wanted another chance. When neither happened, the tone slowly changed. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of plastic bags scraping across the hallway floor. Then footsteps. Then nothing. He'd finally left. At least for the moment. Monday morning felt strangely normal. I arrived at work early, partly because I wanted a distraction, and partly because I didn't know what else to do with myself. Ryan was already there, coffee cup beside his keyboard, spreadsheet open, completely unaware that he'd spent the better part of a year starring in a relationship drama he'd never actually participated in. He looked up when I sat down. Morning. Morning. You look tired. I laughed. You should have seen me yesterday. His expression softened. Everything okay? I hesitated. Not because I was embarrassed. Saying it out loud just made it feel more real. Ethan and I broke up. Ryan blinked. Oh, I nodded. Yeah, There was a brief pause before he spoke again. I'm sorry. The funny thing was that I knew he genuinely meant it. Not because he missed Ethan, because decent people tend to feel bad when someone is hurting, even when the breakup was necessary. I leaned back in my chair. Honestly, it was overdue. He nodded slowly. Was it because of... He pointed toward himself awkwardly. I couldn't help smiling. The fact that he looked uncomfortable asking the question made me trust him more. Ethan thought so. Ryan groaned immediately. You're kidding. I wish. I've talked to you outside work maybe 3 times. Trust me, I've made that argument. One corner of his mouth lifted. The printer conversation really got out of hand. I laughed. A few nearby coworkers glanced over. It was probably the first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. The conversation ended there, but something changed after that. Nothing dramatic. Nothing romantic. I simply noticed how easy it was to be around him. Ryan wasn't perfect. He overthought everything, forgot where he parked his car at least twice a month, and had a habit of apologizing for things that weren't his fault. But he listened when people talked, treated everyone with respect, and never seemed interested in turning every disagreement into a competition. He also had a bad habit of disappearing into work whenever he was stressed, sometimes taking hours to answer a simple text. It annoyed people occasionally, including me later on. After spending months defending myself at home, normal interactions felt surprisingly refreshing. That week passed quickly. Friday afternoon, Ryan stopped by my desk. Random question. That's usually how random questions start. He smiled. A friend of mine is having a birthday dinner tonight. I waited. There'll be 8 people. Nothing crazy. I kept waiting. You should come. I laughed. Is this a pity invitation? No. Are you sure? I'm positive. He pointed toward my monitor. You've spent 3 straight days glaring at spreadsheets. I'm worried they're winning. That made me laugh again. Will there be food? It's Italian. I'm listening. Really good Italian. I pretended to think about it. Fine, you win. The restaurant turned out to be exactly what I needed. Good food. Good conversation. No drama. Nobody asking who I was texting. Nobody demanding explanations. Nobody checking my phone. I hadn't realized how much emotional energy I'd been spending until I suddenly didn't have to spend it anymore. By the end of the evening, most of the group had left. Ryan and I walked toward the parking lot together. The conversation slowed naturally as we reached our cars. I had fun tonight, he said. Me too. He shoved his hands into his pockets. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely nervous. It was oddly reassuring. The nervousness made him seem more genuine than any perfectly rehearsed line ever could. This might be terrible timing, he said. Probably. Okay, good. I laughed. That wasn't exactly encouraging. He laughed too. Then shook his head. See, this is why I'm bad at this. There it was. A flaw. A very human one. Ryan was confident in meetings, confident with clients, confident during presentations. Put him in front of a woman he liked, and suddenly he couldn't finish a sentence correctly. He rubbed the back of his neck. What I meant was, would you want to get coffee sometime? Like a date? Hopefully a better version of that question than I just asked. I couldn't help smiling. Then yes. The relief on his face was immediate. And genuine. Nothing happened that night beyond that. No dramatic kiss. No sweeping romance. Just 2 adults agreeing they'd like to see each other again. The date happened the following weekend. Coffee turned into a 3-hour walk through downtown. The walk turned into dinner. Dinner turned into another date. Everything unfolded naturally, which was exactly why Ethan couldn't handle it. The trouble started the day after I posted a simple photo of myself holding a coffee cup outside a cafe. The caption said, "Good weekend." That was it. No mention of Ryan. No relationship announcement. No hidden message. Just 3 words. 20 minutes later, my phone started ringing. Unknown number. I ignored it. Another number called. Then another. By bedtime, I had 6 missed calls. The following day, I listened to the voicemails. The first accused me of cheating. The second accused me of lying. The third was worse. By the 5th message, the pattern was obvious. Ethan had started talking. And unfortunately, people were listening. I was deleting the final voicemail when my phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Ethan's sister. Curiosity got the better of me. I answered. Big mistake. What is wrong with you? No hello. No introduction. Straight to outrage. I leaned back in my chair. Good afternoon to you too. You already moved on? There it was. The accusation Ethan had apparently been sharing with anyone willing to listen. I sighed. Ryan and I have gone on a few dates. It's been a week. We broke up. You expect people to believe nothing happened before that? I stared out the office window. Traffic crawled through the street below. People hurried through their day, while I somehow found myself having the exact same conversation I'd been having for 7 months. Your brother accused me of cheating long before we broke up, because he knew something wasn't right. No, I said quietly, because he didn't trust me. That conversation went nowhere. Every answer I gave was met with another accusation. Eventually, she changed tactics. Ethan can't sleep. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I'd heard versions of this argument before. He barely eats. We broke up. He's devastated. I know. You don't care? I looked down at my desk. For a second, I genuinely considered the question. Then I answered honestly. I care that he's hurting. I don't regret leaving. She hung up a few moments later. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A few hours later, reception called my desk. Natalie? Yeah? There's someone here asking for you. My stomach tightened immediately. Who? A pause. Then the answer. Ethan Walker. Every nerve in my body went alert. Because showing up at my apartment was one thing. Showing up at my workplace was something entirely different. And as I hung up the phone, I had a feeling this situation was about to become much bigger than a breakup. The receptionist must have heard something in my voice because she immediately lowered hers. Do you want security involved? I didn't answer right away. A month earlier, I probably would have gone downstairs. I would have tried to keep the peace, avoid a scene, and convince myself Ethan just needed closure. But the relationship had ended, and with a little distance came a level of clarity I hadn't had while I was living inside the situation. Showing up uninvited at someone's workplace wasn't closure. It was a boundary being crossed. Tell him I'm unavailable, I said. There was a brief pause. And if he refuses to leave? Call security. 5 minutes later, I watched from a conference room window as 2 security guards escorted Ethan toward the lobby doors. Even from several floors up, I could tell he was arguing. His hands moved animatedly while he talked. One guard remained calm. The other pointed toward the exit. Eventually, Ethan left. I wish I could say that was the moment he accepted reality. It wasn't. When Ryan stopped by my desk later that afternoon, he immediately noticed something was wrong. You okay? I told him what happened. His expression darkened. He came here? Apparently. That's not normal. No. I stared at my monitor. It's really not. Neither of us said much after that. There wasn't much to say. For months, I'd been treating Ethan's behavior like a relationship problem. Sitting there at my desk, I started wondering if it was something else entirely. That night, I drove home feeling unsettled. Not scared exactly. Uneasy. The kind of feeling you get when a storm is building somewhere in the distance and you can't tell how close it is. A few hours later, while I was answering emails on my couch, a notification popped up. Message request. New account. No profile photo. No followers. No posts. Just one sentence. You think you've won, but this is only the beginning. I stared at it. Read it twice. Before I could take a screenshot, the account disappeared. Maybe it was Ethan. Maybe it wasn't. I couldn't prove anything. Still, the message stayed with me. So did the feeling that things weren't over. 3 days later, my manager asked me to stop by his office. The moment I walked in, I knew why. An email sat open on his monitor. The email had been sent from an anonymous account and was filled with accusations that were as serious as they were false. According to the message, Ryan and I had supposedly been carrying on a secret workplace relationship for months. The claims were ridiculous. The timing wasn't. My manager waited while I finished reading. When I looked up, he asked one question. Anything I should know about? No. He nodded immediately. That's what I thought. The confidence in his answer surprised me. Natalie, I've worked with you for 3 years. He leaned back in his chair. If someone wanted me to believe this, they picked the wrong employee. Some of the tension eased from my shoulders. Then he added another sentence. HR has already seen it. There went the relief. They don't believe it either, he continued quickly, but they're documenting everything. That made sense. Companies document problems even when they know the complaint is nonsense. The issue wasn't the accusation itself. It was the pattern forming around it. When I left the office, Ryan was waiting outside. Apparently news traveled fast. Anonymous email? I nodded. Ethan? Almost certainly. Ryan sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. Something he'd started doing whenever he was stressed. I don't understand how people have this much energy. I laughed despite myself. Trust me, neither do I. The following weekend, Ryan suggested getting out of town for the afternoon. Nothing elaborate. Just a small lake about an hour away. A walking trail. Food trucks. Fresh air. Honestly, it sounded perfect. For a few hours, life felt normal again. We talked about childhood stories, terrible jobs, embarrassing school memories. At one point, Ryan laughed so hard he nearly dropped his drink, which only made me laugh harder. Being around him felt easy. Not magical. Not perfect. Easy. And after the emotional marathon of the previous year, easy felt revolutionary. That evening, Ryan walked me to my apartment. He kissed me goodnight and headed toward the elevator. I unlocked my door, then stopped. An envelope sat on the floor outside my apartment. No stamp. No address. Just my name. Immediately, every instinct I had started screaming. I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a photograph of Ryan and me leaving a coffee shop a few days earlier. The picture had clearly been taken from across the street. My stomach dropped. Attached to it was a handwritten note. 3 words. I see everything. I called Ryan before I even stepped inside. He answered immediately. Everything okay? No. 10 minutes later, he was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the photograph. This is stalking. I know. You've kept everything else? Every message, every voicemail, every email. Good. I looked up. Good. He nodded. His voice remained calm, but I could tell he was worried. This isn't heartbreak anymore, Natalie. Neither of us said the word that was hanging in the room. We didn't have to. The next morning, I went to the police station. I brought screenshots, call logs, voicemails, copies of emails, the photograph, the note, everything. The officer listened carefully while I walked her through the timeline. When I finished, she looked down at the evidence and tapped the photo. You did the right thing coming in. The seriousness in her voice made my stomach tighten. Before I left, she gave me a piece of advice. Install a camera. That same afternoon, I ordered one. 2 days later, it was mounted outside my apartment door. At the time, I thought I was being cautious. I didn't realize the camera was about to become the most important purchase I'd made all year. 3 nights later, it captured Ethan trying different keys in my lock at 2:30 in the morning. I watched the footage over breakfast, then watched it again. Then a third time. He wasn't knocking. He wasn't calling. He was trying to get inside. The police took that very seriously. So did Ryan. A few days later, another alert came through. This time I was awake. I opened the live feed and saw Ethan crouched outside my apartment holding a screwdriver. For several seconds, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. Then reality caught up. He was trying to remove the doorknob. I called 911. By the time officers arrived, he was gone. The footage wasn't. The video showed everything. After that, something changed in me. The fear started giving way to anger. Not explosive anger. The quieter kind. The kind that appears when you're tired of rearranging your life around someone else's behavior. I stopped wondering what Ethan might do next. I focused on documenting what he'd already done. Every message, every call, every incident, every piece of evidence. That decision ended up mattering more than I realized. Because about a week later, Ethan made the mistake that finally caught up with him. The anonymous complaints continued. Only this time, whoever sent them wasn't careful. The messages could be traced back to his employer's computer system. My company's HR department contacted his company's HR department. An investigation followed. The outcome came surprisingly fast. The investigation moved quickly. Ethan was first placed on administrative leave, then subjected to an internal review. Not long afterward, he lost his job. I heard about it through mutual acquaintances. My first reaction wasn't satisfaction. It was disbelief that he'd been willing to risk his job over something that should have ended the day we broke up. Unfortunately, even losing his job wasn't enough. A few weeks later, we found ourselves in court. By then, nearly 3 months had passed since the Instagram post, and those months had been filled with messages, harassment complaints, and increasingly disturbing behavior. The hearing itself wasn't dramatic. Nobody shouted. Nobody delivered a speech. The evidence simply spoke for itself. The judge reviewed everything. The door camera footage, phone records, messages, emails, and police reports, all arranged in a timeline that was impossible to argue with. Watching it all presented together was strangely surreal. For months, I'd been living through the chaos one incident at a time. Seeing the entire timeline at once made it look even worse than I'd remembered. Eventually, the judge turned toward Ethan. Do you dispute this evidence? His attorney tried. Ethan tried. Neither explanation changed the facts. By the end of the hearing, his request was denied. Mine was granted. 1-year protective order. No contact. No third-party contact. No approaching my home. No approaching my workplace. The judge's final statement was simple. The evidence demonstrates a pattern of escalating behavior. That was enough. Outside the courthouse, I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt relieved. Because none of this had ever been about winning. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want Ethan fired. I didn't want him humiliated. I wanted peace. For the first time in months, it finally seemed possible. The weeks afterward were quiet. Wonderfully quiet. No messages. No surprise visits. No anonymous accounts. No phone calls. Life slowly returned to normal. Ryan and I continued seeing each other. Carefully. Neither of us rushed anything. After everything that had happened, stability felt more valuable than excitement. About 6 months after the breakup, we were having dinner when Ryan said something that made me laugh. You know what's funny? What? He took a sip of his drink. I never thought of you that way before all this happened. I raised an eyebrow. That's a terrible thing to tell your girlfriend. He laughed. No. No, hear me out. I'm listening. Ethan spent so much time accusing us of something that wasn't happening that it made me pay attention to how much I actually enjoyed being around you. I laughed so hard people at the next table looked over. The irony was ridiculous. Months of jealousy, months of suspicion, months of accusations. And none of it had been true until after the relationship ended. Sometimes life has a strange sense of humor. A few weeks later, I found myself looking at that old Instagram post again. Same picture, same caption, same comments, hundreds of likes. Buried beneath hundreds of comments was the same reply I'd left that first night. Real talk. Back then, it had been a sarcastic response. Months later, it felt more like a summary of everything that had happened. I smiled when I saw it. Back then, I thought the breakup, the Instagram post, and proving Ethan wrong were the important parts of the story. I understand now that none of those things mattered nearly as much as I thought they did. Looking back, I realized the story was never really about proving Ethan wrong. It was about learning that walking away from an unhealthy relationship isn't cruelty, and protecting yourself isn't revenge. Ethan spent months telling people I'd ruined his life. What actually happened was much simpler. I ended an unhealthy relationship and later protected myself when Ethan refused to accept that it was over. Everything that followed came from decisions he made on his own. As for me, I got something far more valuable than being right. I got my peace back. After everything that happened, I realized that was worth far more than winning an argument, proving a point, or getting the last word. It was simply the life I'd been trying to get back from the moment I walked away.